Hello there, you're watching Debrief on CNN News 18. I'm Maha Siddiqui. Data is the new gold and tech companies mines of the lucrative commodity. This naturally makes these companies more powerful than one can imagine. As global fights break out between governments and big tech, it's not as simple as just non-compliance with some orders that have them riled up. It's much more than what meets the eye. It has been used to tactfully influence populations. Those who have used it are well aware of its potential. So much so that there exists a danger of democracies being subverted through these online platforms. And that brings us to the big question. Do tech giants need to be regulated? And a bigger question, who has the right to regulate them? Let's start with the latest controversy in India. Twitter has been stripped of its legal immunity as an intermediary platform by the government of India. Twitter has maintained silence on the latest development, but the government has come out stating that the microblogging site has deliberately overlooked the government's new IT rules for grievance redressal and compliance. As a result, they are finding themselves in trouble now. Arunima with the details.
The tweets are turning shrill. But it's no longer a war of words alone. Social media giant Twitter has lost its legal immunity after it failed to comply with government orders on new IT rules. And within hours, police action was initiated against Twitter in the state of Uttar Pradesh. An FIR has named Twitter Inc. and Twitter Communication India Private Limited, accusing the microblogging platform of allowing users to spread misinformation and fake news, which could lead to riots. This after some Twitter handles shared a video of an old man who claimed he was assaulted and targeted in a communal attack in Loni. The police has refuted the claim.
इंक्वायरी में इस घटना का कोई भी धार्मिक एंगल होना नहीं पाया गया। ये घटना निजी कारणों से तावीज़ को लेकर के नाराजगी आक्रोश जैसा इनके द्वारा बताया गया है, उसके चलते इन्होंने करी। हमने इसको गंभीरता से लिया और इसमें मारपीट में जो व्यक्ति सम्मिलित पाए गए उनमें से 3 व्यक्तियों की हम ऑलरेडी गिरफ्तारी करके जेल भेज चुके हैं। शेष व्यक्तियों के लिए हमारी टीमें लगातार प्रयासरत हैं।
Stringent sections of the Indian Penal Code have been invoked in the FIR, from criminal conspiracy, provoking people to riot and causing communal discord. Twitter may have been able to escape the legal noose as an intermediary platform, but since the social media giant failed to appoint grievance redressal and compliance officers as mandated under Section 79 of the IT Act, it now faces the prospect of criminal action for third-party content shared on its platform.
It will not receive the benefit of safe harbor as it has not complied with Section 79(2)(c) of the IT Act, which states that the intermediary must observe due diligence and compliance with all government rule, regulation and guidelines in this behalf as per the guidelines of 2021. Police has alleged violations. Therefore, under Section 85 of the IT Act, people in charge at Twitter can be made and held liable for violating the provisions mentioned under the IPC.
Interestingly, Twitter has now advertised for the position of compliance and grievance redressal officer. But this comes days after the deadline of informing the IT Ministry of the appointments ended.
For such a large platform which has more than 50 crore users in India, if somebody tweets holding the employees of that company liable and accountable, putting a criminal liability on them, I think that's too much of an ask within 3 months.
Curiously though, in the Delhi High Court, Twitter had said it has appointed an officer as mandated by IT rules. But the claim has been contested by petitioners.
But Twitter has appointed an independent lawyer as a resident grievance officer, which is not correct. Right now, there is no immunity available, so that's why FIR is maintainable. If they appoint a permanent resident grievance officer, there will be no further FIR.
Meanwhile, the government is clear. They will come down hard on any company showing reluctance in following Indian laws.
So what next? If today Twitter appoints a grievance officer and informs the Information and Technology Ministry, does that mean relief in the UP FIR case? The straight answer from lawyers is no. An offence has already been committed and it cannot be waived off retrospectively unless a court steps in and says that mentioning Twitter's name in that FIR was wrong. However, to prevent any further FIRs across the country, Twitter could come up and inform the Ministry of Compliance. For now, however, UP Police is making it clear that they are going to send notice to all accused, including Twitter, in connection with the Loni case. In New Delhi, Arunima.
Now, tech giants being on the wrong side of law is not new. Facebook and its founder Mark Zuckerberg have been accused of trying to overlook hate and propaganda on the platform. In the US, while they found it easy to act against a president who lost the election, in India, the platform and its messaging service WhatsApp have allowed fake news to run unchecked.
A day after the Capitol Hill violence, on January 8th, Donald Trump's Twitter account was suspended for glorifying violence, a violation of Twitter guidelines. Facebook and Apple too acted against the then US president. The Mark Zuckerberg-owned Facebook later banning the former US president till at least January 2023, just in time for the next election. Google banned Parler, a social networking app popular among conservative users in the US. Trump's social media ban has sparked off a debate on the power of tech companies to censor or promote content at will.
Big tech has made a terrible mistake and very, very bad for our country, and that's leading others to do the same thing. And it causes a lot of problems and a lot of danger. Big mistake, they shouldn't be doing it, but there's always a counter move when they do that. I've never seen such anger as I see right now, and that's a terrible thing.
This wasn't Zuckerberg's first brush with controversy. In 2018, the Facebook CEO was publicly questioned by the US Congress over the handling of user information. He faced almost 600 questions, including if the company must be regulated and whether it censors content. The hearing happened after political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica harvested the data of over 87 million Facebook users.
We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry. I started Facebook, I run it, and I'm responsible for what happens here. It will take some time to work through all the changes we need to make across the company, but I'm committed to getting this right.
And the ripples of the Cambridge Analytica scandal were felt in India too. The BJP accused the Congress party of accessing the data of over 5 lakh Indians to influence voters during the Bihar elections. But the questioning of the whistleblower in UK didn't yield much.
I believe I have some documentation on India, which I can also provide to the committee if that's something of interest.
Very welcome.
The scandal blew over as there was no concrete evidence to link the Congress to Cambridge Analytica. But soon, it was the BJP that became an accused in utilizing the platform. A Wall Street Journal report claimed that Facebook's India policy head Anki Das didn't remove anti-Muslim posts by a BJP leader so as to not upset the party. She's claimed to have said that punishing violations from Narendra Modi's political party would hurt the company's business prospects in India. Facebook denied favoring any party, but Anki Das had to resign. Facebook has over 41 crore users in India, and its messaging service WhatsApp has 53 crore users. The company has always been accused of doing little to curb hate speech and toxic content, a charge it denies. Natasha Menden for CNN News 18.
I'm now being joined by two guests who will explain to us what the ramifications of this governments versus tech, big tech, really means not just for India but globally. Erin Watson-Lynn, International Relations Consultant and former Senior Fellow, Perth US Asia Centre, Australia, and Jitin Jain, cyber expert, both with us here on the show. Many thanks to both of you. Jitin, coming first to you because I want to start with the specific issue of Twitter. There's one more complaint we understand that has now been filed in Delhi, in the Tilak Marg police station. There's another one that's already there in Loni. Then we saw a few weeks ago the Delhi police, in fact, going to the offices of Twitter in Delhi NCR to give them a notice. Many people believe that this almost looks like a political witch hunt rather than cracking down on a social media platform for violating regulations. Shouldn't there be a better way of going about regulating platforms if the concern is so huge?
Look, it is like this. For last 10 years, these companies have been trying to evade any legal accountability in India. They have set up some subsidiaries to do business. They make money through advertisements, intervene policy discussions, go to parliamentary hearings, do all sort of advertising propaganda, attend meetings. But whenever it comes to any legal accountability, a court hearing or a summon, like what Twitter India MD replied to Delhi police, they said that, look, I have got nothing to do with Twitter US. I am running a sales and marketing company here. Now, second, almost 40% of user base of companies like Twitter and Facebook or WhatsApp comes from India, and according to the size and chunk of revenue share. Now, tell me, is it wrong to ask for a government to these big tech companies to appoint 3 permanent officers in India who are residents of India, who are available 24/7?
You tell me,
One
Jitin.
to look after the grievances of people, so that if there is a mob photo, sexual violence case or a blackmail or anything, people can go and report or approach. Second, they want a nodal officer whom law enforcement agencies can cooperate in the times of need and national emergency.
Okay.
Third, a chief compliance officer who is responsible for complying with Indian law. For example, Delhi police said Delhi police had to hunt down that who is the person in charge of Twitter, because Twitter India MD says that I've got nothing to do with Twitter India. So this is precisely the reason to end this confusion and mess, to hold them accountable, to make sure they comply with Indian law. 3 high-level employees of Twitter had to be appointed in India. Now tell me one thing. How does asking an appointment of 3 employees is an attack on free speech? How asking them to appoint a grievance officer or a compliance officer is an assault on a business climate or a arm twisting of a foreign company? 3 employees,
but
is it too much to ask?
we are also trying to put this into perspective of the timing. It started picking up pace only after certain allegations were made by a particular political party. I will come back to you. Jitin, I'll come back to you. Let me go across to Erin now. Erin, only 2 days ago, India as well as Australia and others at the G7 signed a statement on open society and open economies, on the freedom of expression both online and offline being critical to maintaining democracies. Does a crackdown on social media platform appear to not be in sync with what was just signed? Is there a way of balancing this out?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the G7, because at the end of the day, anything that's signed at the G7 is non-binding. It's an in-principle agreement. It relies on countries actually complying and legislating based on what is said at the G7. Of course, noting that Australia is not actually a member. We were invited as an observer this year. So even if something is out of step, what might be okay to global level, it doesn't matter what's happening domestically. At the end of the day, none of this is binding. So regardless, what happens there doesn't necessarily get implemented at a domestic level, particularly for non-G7 member countries as well.
All right, Erin, but perception-wise, considering India is such a big democracy and it holds its democratic principles very dear, perception-wise, what message goes out internationally?
Well, one of the big challenges, obviously, at the moment, and I guess for Australia and India, is around the quadrilateral at the moment. So the Quad, as we all know it, is, supposedly built on shared values. So rallying the 4 democracies, the United States, Japan, India, and Australia, based on those shared values like democracy. And that's how we're going to have some sort of balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region with China. But that premise of having shared values is flawed if, you know, a country isn't, I guess, having you know, one of those pillars of democracy, which is free speech. So if you're censoring social media platforms or the content on social media platforms, how do you control that to make sure that you've actually got space for people to have free speech, but at the same time, you're not censoring people as well? And I think that this is one of the key challenges that, say, India and Australia have to come to terms with in that quadrilateral arrangement. Because if you go down that path of talking about shared values and you're not actually living up to those shared values, then that system, the weight of that system, which has just now been elevated to a leaders summit as of this year for the first time, then, you know, someone like China will look at that and go, well, what does this actually mean? You're talking about shared values, but how are the values any different to perhaps what might be going on in China with censorship of the internet or more government control or regulation of the internet? So I think that this definitely sends out a problematic message. I think it's challenging for Australia and India as partners. It's challenging in that quadrilateral environment. It's challenging in that increasing geostrategic competition environment. So this is a real challenge for everyone to be working through right now, particularly India. And as you do sort of work towards having more, you know, because the election that everybody is going to be paying attention to is a Prime Minister's election in that global context.
Jitin, coming back to you, why do you suppose Twitter is silent through it all? Because we haven't seen them speak about the current developments.
Well, why would you say anything at all unless you're, you know, why would you say the best PR mode would just to stay silent?
Erin, I'll take that question with Jitin. Just a second.
So all these 7 countries, G7 countries you mentioned, including 80 more and including all these 7, you know, top big techs like Twitter, Facebook and all, they are all signatory to Hague Declaration of Global Commission on Cyberspace, where they have agreed and signed a declaration for free, open and secure internet. So you're talking also about safe spaces, not only about free and openness. Now, second, you rightly said that timing is very important. Now, but let's figure out who is the suspect, government or Twitter. Now, 3 years ago, on WhatsApp, on rumor mongering on Twitter, 53 people lost life in India. Not even one content was tagged as manipulated or taken down. Second, during Indo-China conflict, where for 26 soldiers lost life, Twitter was showing Ladakh as Chinese territory. Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh was shown as Chinese territory. Timing was very important. Now you go to farmer violence during the farmer protest. On Capitol Hill, you have a different approach where you go on to silent even sitting US president. But when government of India asked to take down contents on asking for genocide, threatening violence at the Red Fort, you come as a fake defender of free speech and refuse to take down any content, in a way instigating rights in the garb of protecting free speech. Timing was very important. Now, when there is a political controversy between 2 lead political parties in India, within hours you label a content as manipulated. Timing was very important. But when when news is tracking across all channels, trending on all social media about a man being beaten up, chances of a major riot in Delhi border yesterday, Twitter does not take down the content. So timing is very important. Third, when you ask them, why have you not appointed these 3 officers? You know what is the reason? Oh, there is pandemic. How can we appoint an officer? Can they file an affidavit that how many employees Twitter have hired across the globe in last 3 months? I know the numbers. So don't tell them that pandemic is stopping you from hiring 1 employee, but you're free to, you know, give ads, hire blog, appoint officers. And last question, you have sent a letter that we intend to comply with law, and that is why you cannot revoke our protection. No, you know, it's like a country says that if you want to drive a car on the road, you need to have a driving license. What Twitter wants is that they want to paste a big sticker on their car that I intend to apply for a driving license, but I will not have a driving license and I still want to drive car in your country.
All right.
This is the problem.
So they had 3 months time to comply with the new IT regulations and they did not.
Just last one point.
Okay.
Government had notified the rules way back in February. They were given 3 months.
Yes.
Twitter never responded.
All right.
After the deadline passed on 26th of May, they sent a letter that we intend to comply.
All right.
So I think it is a question of Twitter willful disobedience of Indian law, willful mockery and insult of Indian parliament. This is the same company which appears in the UK and American parliaments, but not in Indian Parliament.
All right.
So I think they're trying to challenge your sovereignty. They're trying to interfere in your sovereign lawmaking.
All right. That's an important point that you've raised, because I think that kind of a fight happened pretty much in Australia as well, Erin. Facebook had turned off news in Australia this year in protest against a government legislation that would have made Facebook pay for sharing news. In this government versus tech giant fight, Erin, do consumers win or lose?
It's interesting because I think that nobody wins or loses in this situation. And if there's any real loser in this, it's the small media companies, not the large media companies, because, you know, at the end of the day, the big media companies like your News Corp will benefit if they're getting revenue from advertising or revenue from Facebook or Google or whichever tech company it is. But does that flow through to the small players? Is there enough that's going to be coming through to those small, you know, media outlets? And they're the ones that have really come under threat in Australia. So there's been a real decline in the number of regional reporting, offices for media outlets are being shut down all over the place. And that's what we need more of in Australia, not less of. And I guess a more diversified media environment. There's been all kinds of talk in Australia about diversifying our media environment. In fact, there's been a call for a royal commission into the monopolisation of media in Australia. So I guess if there is anyone that we know that probably isn't going to win, they might not necessarily lose, but they might not win out of this, it's going to be those small media outlets as well. But it really was remarkable. And I think that the analysis on what happened when the federal government in Australia settled with the technology companies is that neither of them really won either. There were some changes that were made to the legislation, which was why they did manage to settle. But at the end of the day, Facebook and Google kind of don't win either, and the government doesn't, you know, what's the point in legislating if you don't actually have quality legislation around this kind of stuff? But, you know, what happened here, which I don't know if people know in India, is that they shut down news on Facebook. Facebook just stopped publishing news outlets in Australia. And at the time, it was, you know, when I guess a lot of Australians rely on our public news services in emergencies, so bushfires, weather, pandemics, all kinds of things. So when you lose your access to news through Facebook, which similar to internet, similar to India, so many people access their news through Facebook. We lost that access, and all it showed really was just how reliant and how dependent we are on just a
and Erin, if I may interrupt you, and the power of these tech companies over us now 100%. With all the kind of data that they have. Many thanks, Erin and Jitin, both of you, for getting us your views on this issue and also giving us a global perspective on that. In fact, after a quick break, we'll explain what exactly happened in Australia in February when Facebook and the Scott Morrison government were at loggerheads. Welcome back. Now, social media giants are also making big bucks using media content. The Australian government decided to make them pay the media houses their due. But in a show of how powerful they are, Facebook shut off critical news on the COVID-19 pandemic, leaving many scrambling for information. As a result, a compromise was struck. Here's more on what happened in Australia. He's the 5th richest man in the world. His company, Facebook, is valued at $720 billion. Yet the social media platform has been locked in a battle with the Australian government over paying local news publishers for content.
Facebook has refriended Australia. The purpose of the code and the purpose of the Morrison government's intentions of all along have been designed to sustain public interest journalism in this country.
Earlier on, in a sharp response to the unamended proposed bill, Facebook had blacked out news content for many of its Australian users. The move had further aggravated the friction until the compromise was reached, under which the Australian government is giving time to tech giants to strike commercial deals with news outlets. In a statement, Facebook's managing director for Australia and New Zealand said,
We are satisfied that the Australian government has agreed to a number of changes and guarantees that address our core concerns.
As the world watched the Facebook Unfriends Australia story, Prime Minister Morrison called his counterparts in India, Canada and UK and the French president to stitch a global coalition against the tech giants. Ironically, Morrison had posted on Facebook to tell Facebook that they may be changing the world, but that doesn't mean they run it. Also, the jury is still out on whether and how can governments regulate online platforms while they could get dangerous and pose a peril for democracies. Ironically, though, democracies do thrive on freedom of expression itself. That's it then for today. See you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.